And you have a lot of people there who are working very, very hard, and they're not getting a lot of sleep, and they're really focusing on a big country that we have. And from Dr. Birx to Dr. Fauci to the vice president, who's worked very hard, the Surgeon General, they are really doing a good job.
Dr. Fauci's really doing a good job. That's very nice of you, Ron DeSantis, to acknowledge that. How big of you to acknowledge that 3 years ago and to run from that position ever since, once you realized that you needed to remake yourself politically. I have no doubt that Trump is probably going to use that video against him, even though Fauci worked for Trump and continued to months and months and months into the pandemic. But what you saw right there was Ron DeSantis back when he was trying to pitch himself as a more reasonable person. He was in some cases in Florida actually working with the Democrats to get some stuff done. And why wouldn't he have that position? For some of you who've been following politics every day, you might think, well, it's crazy to acknowledge Fauci. Why would you ever do that? No, until we were a year into the pandemic, or not a year, but 6 months into the pandemic, wanting to stop your people from dying would have been considered good politics. It took a lot of work by Republicans to get their base to accept that no, trying to stop people from dying is woke nonsense and you shouldn't do it. So Ron DeSantis in the beginning was a reasonable governor who was like, yeah, I don't want Floridians to needlessly die. And then he looked out there at the monologues that Tucker Carlson was giving, and he saw that Trump was either too lazy or disinterested to do anything about the pandemic. And he realized, oh no, we're actually competing with each other to seem like we're the most willing to pile up a pyramid of skulls of our own constituents. And so he changed and became anti-vax and became anti-Fauci. But you're probably gonna be able to find a lot of stuff like that video if you look back then, because this isn't actually who he is, or at least it wasn't a few years ago. Brett, thoughts?
There's two aspects of talent. One is natural ability and the other is knowing what to steal. People say that a lot, that talent is just knowing what to steal. And DeSantis is good at the second thing. He's not good at the first thing. He's great at knowing what to steal. And so he started stealing the right things from Trump, but he doesn't have the natural ability to make that look effortless. And the more that we have access to moments like this, that remind us that the guy was doing stuff that seemed reasonable before the hubris of a guy who wants to just be president more than anything kicked in. And so, that's basically where we're at. And it reminds us that everybody at the time saw how many folks were dying of this disease. And it was different than other times viruses came along and folks were really scared, like that SARS was gonna kill us all. This one stuck around because it was killing people. And I saw that there's an interview that Sam Morril, who's like my new favorite comedian, and my wife makes fun of me for how into him I am, went on the Joe Rogan podcast and they were having a totally normal conversation until Joe Rogan pointed out that during Sam's specials at the beginning of the pandemic, they had people wearing masks outside. And Sam's response was just like, we didn't know. Like no one knew. We were just doing the safe thing because that seemed reasonable at the time. And now it's gotten so hyper political that you have these folks that just get so mad because they feel so smart when they're saying things that are so stupid.
Yeah. By the way, don't look at the chat because you are being mocked by your wife in the chat about your love for that comedian, who I looked up and I think I found the wrong person. But I'm actually very curious to see the comedians that you're into. I'm gonna have to look into that.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.